Hi, so I am here to present a seminar on the topic mastering clean architecture in the context of Flutter. So basically in this video or in this seminar, I am planning to describe the contents like the what is clean architecture and what principles this clean architecture follows, and what are the different layers that are present in clean architecture, and what does each layers do in clean architecture. So and which are the some good practices that we can use while implementing clean architecture, and at finally how a clean architecture is integrated into a Flutter application. So let's get into the seminar. So first of all, what's a clean architecture? So clean architecture is introduced in 2012 by JC Bob. So it is mainly focused on three principles, and clean architecture is actually a programming architecture which helps the developers or which helps the programmers to easily swap between different parts of our program. For example, like if you are depending on a particular database, and in future if you want to swap into another database, by using clean architecture it will be very easy for us. Like the program which we built using the help of clean architecture will be independent from the framework and the database and all, and the business logic will always stays same. So we can easily swap the frameworks like front-end frameworks or even the back-end databases easily without no more hectic work or without entirely ruining the business logic. So that's one of the greatest advantage of using clean architecture. Now let's get into the principles of clean architecture. So the first and foremost principle of clean architecture is that it's the dependency rule. So the dependency rule states that all the dependencies should be pointed inward to the application, which means like the inner layers of the application will be always holding the core business logics, and that will not be affected by any of the changes which are happening in the outermost layers. And another rule is that uh, it's about the concerns of independence of concerns, which means like the different layers should be independent, and they should not be coupled together, which means if they are coupled together then we cannot easily swap those things, or it will be very hard for us to do multiple testings in our program. So it should be concern of the dependencies, and these are the one of the some of the core rules which clean architecture follows. And now let's get into the different layers of clean architecture. So basically clean architecture has three basic layers. The first one is that domain layer. It is the middle layer and which holds the core logic, and the next one is the data layer, which is responsible for doing all the data related things like accessing the API data or accessing data from local database or server databases. And the last layer is presentation layer. It is the layer which is directly interacting with the end user. So in data layer, basically we have some sub layers or subfolders like data resources, and the data resource will be responsible for directly interacting with the data sources like our API calls or like fetching data from local database or even from server database. So that's the layer which is directly interacting to the outside data, and it will be followed by the model class, and that will be used to transfer data to the repository, and the repository in the data layer will be responsible for converting this data which is getted from the data source into the domain layer. So this repository will be act as a channel or act as a bridge between this domain layer and the data layer. And in the domain layer actually it starts with the another repository, and in that repository actually we don't do any implementations. That will be in that repository only contains all the interfaces for the data layer, and in the repository of our data layer actually we implement all those interfaces from our domain layer repository, and through that way we will get a rigid and structure format for doing our application. So even if we want to swap our data layer, we want the business logic will be stay same, and we only wanted to again implement those interfaces from the domain layer. So through that way we will get into our domain layer, and in the domain layer these repository interfaces will be followed by entity, and entity will be like a real life entity or a model which will be represent a real life thing or an object, and that will be always stay same. And from now onwards we uses this entity to pass our data throughout our application to the other levels. And after following the entity we have use cases, and use cases will be in our domain layer, and the use cases actually will be responsible for doing a single task at a time, which means like we will create as much as use cases for as much as tasks we have. Like for example, if you have a login, then we will create a use case for a login, and that use case will be responsible only for doing the login, and for the sign up we will create other use case. So and these use cases will be followed by a rigid format which will be stored in our core folders. So these use cases actually format or pulls the data to be in a proper rigid structured format, so that the developers or the people who are writing the code should be put in a situation to follow the proper rules of the use cases. So that's how use cases work, and the use cases will be responsible for directly bridging to the presentation layer. And presentation layer is the layer which where we will hold the entire front end frameworks, and that's the layer which will be directly interacting with the end user. And this presentation layer contains pages and uh, presentation logics, which means like in according to Flutter we will have to use different state managements, like we can use provider, blog, getx, different types of state managements are present in Flutter. So these presentation logics folders or this sublayer will be responsible for holding all these presentation logics, like means if error occurs, what should be sent to the UI, or if a state is success, then what should be sent to the UI. So all these logical representation logics, which means what should be displayed in the presentation layer, is actually decided in the presentation logic layer, and the use case will be directly connected to this presentation logic layer. And from the presentation logic layer, like we will connect to the screens and widgets, which means that will be the place we will display our actual data to the end user, and from there the user will be do interactions, and this will get backwards to the logic layer, and from there it goes actually to the backwards in a way which we came from. So this is how actually a clean architecture works. And in the context of Flutter, like as I said, dependency injection one of the crucial part of clean architecture. So for injecting dependencies, we have different packages like getit and injectable. So these are some of the popular packages which we can use to inject our dependency into a Flutter application. So this is all about clean architecture, and this is one of the most popular and most industry level used architecture, because it gives a lot of freedom and lot of flexibility for the developers to customize or swap things in the future. So it will not like hold us, or it will not pull back to a particular thing. So we will get more flexibility to swap whatever things we want, and it will still hold the core business logic as it is when it is developed. So these are some of the importance of clean architecture, and yeah, that's all about clean architecture. So that's it. Thank you.